Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. Today, I have Jennifer Joyce, a longtime friend of mine, as well as an exceptional entrepreneur with us today. Jennifer is an experienced real estate professional specialized in Texas market. Her investing skills and experience spent over 20 years performing various real estate investment activities. She started with single family investment and then transitioned to the commercial real estate in 2007 with emphasis on large value add opportunities. She has an excellent reputation building relationships with broker, professional services, investors, and vendors. Excellent financing history with no bankruptcy and high credit scores. Puts a great amount of focus into building a team to acquire and operate properties. Dedicated to providing transparency, well thought out business strategies, and financial reports to her investors, and great promoter of community development activities, and take pride in safe and livable solution. And Jennifer today, she just shared with me she has her portfolio is going to be over 1,500 units, multifamily property owned and managed currently. And I think Jennifer's husband's actually also working kind of in the business. We'll get into a little bit more in this episode. Welcome to our show today, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. How are you?
Good, doing good. Yeah, she's one that has a lot of energy, so energy level for our episode today. And so Jennifer, we always ask all our friends this question to start our show, which is when you think back in your past, who or which incident kind of shaped the entrepreneur who you are today?
Great. Yeah. So to answer that, there was actually two integral people when I was a child that contributed to today. My mother was a teacher and my father was a programmer. And so I had two W-2 parents influencing me, and found out that one of my father's cousins decided to start his own business. And I was very much
Mm,
surprised by that. Didn't know it was out there.
yeah.
Didn't know you could do anything other than work for anybody else. And he just decided one day that he was going to go start his own business. So that gave me some awareness that it was possible, that there's
Mhm.
things out there besides just, going to college and getting a good job. The other influencer was actually my mother. So
Mhm.
even though she was a teacher, she also owned rental properties. So every summer, when the school year would end, me and my brother would go work on the rental properties, and all of her leases expired in the summer. So they cleaned, gutted, all of the things you could imagine as a nightmare on a rental property, we saw as children, right?
Yeah,
And who got to do all of that work is
yeah,
my brother, my mother, and me.
yeah.
And so I came away from that experience pretty much fearless because I felt like I had seen the worst.
Yeah.
As a child, everything's a little bit exacerbated. So I thought that's as bad as it could possibly get, right?
Yeah.
And so that opened my eyes to real estate very young. So I'm
Mhm.
second generation. And I also knew how bad it could get and that you can recover from that.
Mhm.
So that sense of analysis paralysis didn't exist. I knew it was possible to start businesses through real estate and earn income from that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Because you kind of see the worst and then but also you see the recovery. I think that's really great to emphasis is from that, which is the resiliency of real assets. Um, and so moving forward, but you didn't end up just become an entrepreneur right out the gate. You kind of fulfill the W-2 duty. Tell us a little bit about that transition, like how that kind of transpired. Yeah.
Like any parents, they want their child to go get a degree, right? So I was very much pushed in that direction to go ahead and get a degree. So while I was getting my degree, I had to earn money in order to pay for the tuition. And so I stumbled into the IT world while I was earning my degree, but my degree was in accounting.
Mm.
I was really good at math, and I felt like it was a good fit. And so I was studying to be an accountant while earning an income in IT. So by the time I graduated with my bachelor's, the entry level position for an accountant was a $25,000 pay cut to
Oh,
go to my degree.
yeah.
And so I said, who would want to do that? But I satisfied the requirement of my parents. I got the degree and I stayed in the IT world for quite some time.
Mhm.
Then after my firstborn, I wanted to scale back. I wanted to have less hours, less travel. I was traveling for IT. And so I said, my husband was making good money by that time. And I said, well, why don't I try out this accounting degree that I got
Mhm.
all those years ago? And went, of all places, and worked for CB Richard Ellis, keeping the books on high-rise office buildings, and
Nice.
got to see profit and loss statements for owners and third-party property manager salaries and all the things related to that behind the scenes that you see as an accountant.
Mhm.
And so, it just further pushed me into the real estate side. I
Mhm.
kept getting exposed over and over again.
Yeah.
Uh, and once I had my college tuition paid for through my IT degree, I also started investing in real estate. So I was working and traveling, and buying real estate all along the way. And like most people, started out in single family because
Mhm.
that's what I had been taught by my mother.
Right.
And then I thought the strategy was you buy one house, then you buy two, and eventually you'll own multifamily and larger assets as you keep duplicating that money.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a huge transition, but also one that you kind of collected your skill sets along the way to do that. Now, you mentioned you have some single family holdings. Like a lot of us, we started with single family and get kind of transitioned into the bigger games. So, what is your first investment like? Being single family. What did you learn? How did you get into it? You know.
So, like most people, I paid for a course with a guru. And so 20 years ago, I found a guy who actually I just recently found out he's still doing it. He's still educating. And I took a course where he went over all the different possibilities in real estate. And one of the things that he provided was purchase contracts, assignment contracts, and leases.
Mhm.
So when I bought my very first house, I actually used his templates to get started. And
Mhm.
what I learned with that first rental property is as much as they try to give you a template of what they think might go right or wrong, you
Mhm.
learn as you own or operate what might go right or wrong. And so
Right.
I learned to revise my leases the further I got into circumstances for that next resident.
Mhm.
Every time we had something go awry, we built it into our next lease for either a renewal or a new house.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of really learning on the go type of thing. And so from the single family, and then how did you find the funding for that? Did you just saved up from your W-2 and kind of bought your own properties?
Some of it was W-2 and some of it was the timing. So 20 years ago, we had the refi boom, which also meant we had 100% financing, no doc, no credit, no income. Everybody's heard about that because they saw the results of it in 2008, right?
Right.
Back in 2000, 2001, you could, if you did it correctly, you could find things that were going to rent for more than the mortgage payment, and you
Right.
could go in with little to no money down. And so I was taking my W-2 savings and taking care of the closing costs or partial down payments and getting into as many single families as I possibly could during that time. Now you paid in interest rate for doing it that way, but
Mhm.
I still was able to cover all the expenses and make a little profit on every single one that I did.
Yeah.
And so it was just a strategy that I used to get into the space very young
Mhm.
because the fear factor was already gone from my childhood. And so now 100% financing was available. And I
Mhm.
knew over time those properties would appreciate.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so then how did you transition into the commercial space?
Into the commercial space. So as you grow your single family portfolio, then you start to get more creative. You want to buy things for cents on the dollar. You don't want to pay retail. So we started looking at bankruptcies, foreclosures, tax sales, and we ended up buying property at the steps and turning around and flipping it for bigger cash proceeds to double and triple. And so we started buying small multifamily through bankruptcies, foreclosures, and tax sales.
Mm.
And so our first apartment complex was 12 units in Arlington, Texas,
Mhm.
and we bought it on the steps,
Wow.
cash.
Wow.
So we only knew at the time to use our own money. We didn't know any other way other than getting a loan for a partial real estate transaction or paying all cash at the steps to do that type of transaction. That's all
Gotcha.
we knew at the time. So 2007 was our very first multifamily building.
Nice, nice. And so 2007, the first multifamily building, I think in between there was like 2008. Was that right before the crash or was that right after crash? And how do you kind of deal with that?
So the 2008 was the second market correction we had been through. The
Right.
first one was 9/11. So we
Uh-huh.
purchased a ton of single family right before 9/11. And then we bought our first multifamily right before the 2008 crash.
Great.
So that was our second correction. But the good thing about rental properties is when things are going in the wrong direction for your homeowners, you have increased rent amounts happening in the rental space.
Mm,
So our rental properties were thriving through those economic corrections. And then they kind of stabilize, and then people start selling off again because prices are rising. Then you have your economic correction, then rents raise again, and you start all over. So it's very much almost like a 10-year cycle. And we figured out now that it's 2021, we figured out they last about 8 to 12 years
mhm,
between cycles. So we should expect there to be a correction about every 8 to 12 years, just off of my adult life, that
mhm.
not going off of economics or anything like that, just my personal experience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then some will say that maybe the corrections already happened. You know, that's often a question I got from investors about, hey, where do you think the market is? And some will say, hey, the correction already happened, and it's true for small business owners. And some will say, well, we don't know when the shoe is dropped. So what's kind of your take on that?
So I think we had a Texas winter freeze, and the
Yeah.
Texas winter freeze is gone, but we have not had our winter yet. And we're starting to see signs of that. I mean, if you look at, we have a labor shortage, there's for hire signs everywhere. There's supply chain issues everywhere. We're still infusing millions, if actually trillions of dollars into our economy. There's going to be a consequence for that. And we have some tax laws that are expiring next year.
Got it. So right now, are you in a more acquisition mode, or are you more in a Stacy and cautiously proceed, or more a kind of like, oh, we're waiting and see?
We were never wait and see. So everybody's remembering the last 18 months to 2 years. The minute that that happened, we saw that as that our sign of the next economic correction is on the way. So we went into a frenzy of acquisitions last year. There was a lot of people who went to the sidelines, a lot of people who wanted to wait and see. We did the opposite. We started buying as fast as we could. We also saw opportunity because people were unsure of the market. We were getting major COVID discounts on properties to the tune of 7 figures off of
Nice.
properties we were buying. Things have rubber banded a little bit back where everybody's wanting to get a larger price.
Hmm.
We see another opportunity that if we buy correctly and we're smart about how we enter the multifamily property, we could potentially still sell before the economic correction comes, but we
Hmm.
plan for both. Okay, you
Hmm.
always want to have 2 to 3 exit strategies for everything. So when we go into something, we have a strategy to get out, we have a strategy to do a capital event, and we have a strategy to hold.
Hmm.
So it's more buy and wait. But then if we see more appreciation of the market, you can position that property to sell and maybe get to the point where investors are getting in and out at the returns they're looking for versus waiting for the entire business plan to play out over that correction.
Hmm.
But we
Yeah.
have a business plan in place across that correction so that if we hold, they're still going to get their protected asset and investment back.
Got it. That's awesome. And then, so in terms of the roles that you play, because we know that you mentioned you specialize in Texas market, but really you have properties all over the country. And I know that. So can you kind of shed some lights on, deal acquisition? How do you end up in all these different properties across the country? And how do you kind of scale and manage these?
So I can't do it without teams for sure. We have internal teams and external teams that we work with. This is not like single family where, you can do it alone. you have to have teams of people behind you making it happen. And what you're doing is you're also getting back your time. So you're spreading the work around, and you're only spending a portion of your time times 10 or 12 people. And those can be people that you've third party hired or people you partner with. But when you spread the time across people, you get hours back yourself.
Mhm.
So that's very different from the single family side, where we were doing the hammer and the lease up and the phone calls on Christmas, right?
Right.
Now we
Yeah.
don't take care of any of those things. Now we're looking at how is it financially performing for my investors? If it's not going in the direction as fast as I'd like it to, who can I call on the team, right?
Hmm.
So they can start working and focusing more energy there.
Hmm.
So very different to work on it in a team environment as opposed to working alone or with your spouse.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's
Absolutely.
a big piece. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, that did, which is kind of using team to cross leverage. Now, we always talked about as an entrepreneur, we all each have our superpowers. So, what is your superpower? If someone to come and ask you, like, let's just say in the future, many, 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 many years later, you know, and then someone's asking, okay, what is the special power you had on Earth over here? What would that be?
Never look at the box. I always look outside the box. So if there's a solution in the space that's been duplicated, that's the core of what we do. Like buying multifamily can be duplicated. But what we do outside of that is there a better way to buy multifamily? And
Mhm.
so now we're constantly moving the needle internally, not just on the asset. Can we make it easier or better or cheaper to buy multifamily? Is there a better structure that doesn't exist today that would make it happen faster for everyone?
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of stuff at this level where you want my time freed up, because then I just dream about RevOps. I
Right.
dream about better ways to make revenue. I dream about better ways to make operations efficient. I build systems and processes and teams.
Mhm.
That's where the true superpower comes in,
Mhm.
is if you can figure out that magic. The real estate is a vehicle.
Yeah.
It's no longer about multifamily.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And can kind of pivot into other areas.
Absolutely.
And speaking of a new models, creative ways to do things. Now we all know in syndication world um, that a lot of people are doing raising money for a single deal. I understand that your operation is slightly different. Can you kind of get into a little bit more details of that?
Sure. So we bought 1,500 doors in 19 months. And what we started to notice at that speed is that our closings were colliding. So when you fundraise for property A versus property B, and they happen to be in the same market, our investors were getting confused about which deal we were talking about.
Hmm.
And so it started out as just a good problem to have,
Yeah.
and wanted to create a solution around it. And so, what we are doing, instead of direct asset syndication, where we pick out an address and we put together an offering of how you can get involved as an investor, now we've moved over to a fund that can hold more than one address, and they can be purchased and sold at different times.
Hmm.
So instead, our offering is about what kind of returns the investor will expect to receive. And we go about getting more negotiation power with brokers by crowdsourcing those dollars ahead of the address. We also get better terms with the structure of the team. And
Hmm.
all the while, the investors are already happy with what kind of returns they can expect.
Hmm.
We also can diversify their exposure to risk, because we can put things that are very stabilized, very nice properties, newer properties, next to a property that is a little older, needs some TLC, and is going to have some good cash flow with a little more risk.
Hmm.
And even partner a small portion of the portfolio with some distressed property that
Right.
has a lot of lift that's involved to get it back turned around and a stabilized asset through our business plan. All
Mhm.
of those combined together can give that assurity to our investors that their money is protected.
Mhm.
But they get the benefit of all of those negotiations we've done on price and team percentages and equity stakes, and they even get a bigger bump on what's possible for their returns, because we've gone above and beyond what a passive investor's usual percentage of the equity is.
Hmm. Got it. And so how do you, I guess the return, you kind of allude to it, is due to the diversification of the asset that you hold in the funds. Like, one question people will have, like, how do you actually, because back end is still hinged on these assets, but how can you provide a better return than like just the asset themselves?
The reason is because when we come in with a certain dollar amount to fund that address, we've negotiated not just the LP structure that the team has put together, we also negotiate some ownership equity in the GP stake.
Mhm.
And we pass that both of those buckets to our investors in the fund.
Mhm.
So they're benefiting from both sides of the transaction,
Mhm.
the sweat equity and also the passive investment.
Mhm.
And so for them, it's going to actually pay better than directly investing into the asset syndication.
Gotcha.
And the more we do that, the more dollars we have ahead of time by crowdfunding those, the better the negotiations get, the better returns will be. Absolutely right. We pass promote on to our investors along with their passive investment. That's why the returns are better inside of what we're offering.
Got it. So as a business, kind of let's switch gear a little bit with from the investment and building up the business. There's many questions that we want to ask about, like building out this business. How then do you make money, right? Like we always have these questions like, how then do you actually make money? Because you already passed some of these profit to an investor as well.
So we are not looking for a large share, but what we are doing is we are creating a larger bucket of money. So if I need to do my income that I need from that property on a $10 million purchase, then I'm just subject to that particular transaction. But when I'm going to buy 10 million dollar transactions for $100 million, then I don't need times 10 for me to be okay.
Hmm.
Now I can give more of it to my investors and I can keep less than if I just do one address at a time.
Yeah.
So even I don't need more because at that point we've added several extra commas. So at the end of the day, my family is still going to be able to have a house and a car and go to school and do the things it needs to do. We're not looking to take the same percentage home just because we did 10 times the volume.
Hmm. Yeah, because you also have to put in a lot more effort when you do commence a bigger piece of pie. Yes.
Absolutely. But it also creates some economies of scale there, where now when I was doing it with business partners that all took equity stake, now I can hire W-2 employees to do some of the work that we were doing through business partners.
Yeah, that's a great segue to my next question, which is hiring. So I know that there's always a growing pain challenges on hiring. And do you have any suggestions to folk who are listening to this, maybe thinking about going through that growing pain right now? What are some of the positions that you see are the best hire for your first couple employees? And then also follow up question to that is, when is a good time to switch to a W-2 employee versus a vendor? Yeah.
So I've had some of this come from corporate America. By the time I left corporate America, we had done things like DISC profiles or personality testing. And so I took all that knowledge over here, and the first people that I hired were direct copies of me
Hmm.
that were virtual assistants and office managers. If they had a similar work ethic, personality, and profile type, then I'm able to extend my strengths further.
Mm.
And so then I can offload some of the things I understand and love onto them, and they're a direct copy of me. So we actually started there as opposed to, I'm not really good at social media, I should hire a social media person. Instead, I hired an accountant because I have an accounting background and I
Right.
want them to speak my language so I can get some help in accounting with these financial statements.
Mm.
And that's been extremely successful. But what we found through that process is expect it to be 3 times as long as you want it to be, if not longer. And you're going to go through a lot of attrition before you find the one. And what we learned through that is it even had to be a certain personality type on a personality profile that was highly effective and successful inside our team. And so I would expect, just like you're building relationships with investors or partners, you're going to have to invest way more time than you want to in building an internal team. And
Yeah.
so the first hire is probably not going to stay with you very long. You will get better as a business owner hiring and firing as you get to know people and what your needs truly are.
Hmm. Absolutely. Now, interestingly, that is a very opposite method than I've heard other people do, which is to hire what they're not good at, and then getting that work that they're not competent to other people who are like really this is their superpower to work on. So
Yes.
I'm guessing subsequently you did hire people who are doing the stuff that you're not particularly good with, and then kind of carry that baton as well.
It's been a very interesting journey. So what's happened by almost doing the opposite of what everybody else thinks they should do, right? You're taught when you go into large multifamily to partner with your weaknesses. So guess what happens with your business partners?
Hmm.
They hire lookalikes to them. So if you're not good at social media, but your partner is, and they hire a virtual assistant or a staff member who's good at social media, they can speak their language and make an extension of themselves. So you don't eliminate all your partners. You're still going to have weaknesses. You're still going to partner with your weaknesses, but they have the ability to grow their teams as well.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you end up staying with the similar partners as you go into your 5 or 10 or 20-year projections,
Mhm.
and they continue to bring those weaknesses through staff members over time.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Got it. So hire your weaknesses. You kind of answer the question of weaknesses, but maybe partner with people who are similar to you. It depends on situations and the roles
The
that
op-
you want them to play.
it's the opposite. You're going to hire your strengths and you're going
Uh-huh.
to partner with your weaknesses, and your
Gotcha.
partners are going to hire their similar
They're
person
similar
that
people because they understand them. Huh,
exactly.
interesting. Very good. Learned something. Maybe that's why all these years bending my head on hiring people. Great. And so what is kind of like 5 years, 10 years from here, Jennifer, for you and your family?
So 5 years from now, we will be probably working on fund number 4 or 5. We see this first one establishing track record, and then they'll get pretty quick after that, just like buying multifamily. What I see in 10 years is we'll be headed for another correction, right? We'll be back in the full cycle of things. So my kids will be teenagers at that point, and we'll be preparing for the next appreciation of the market and then the correction. So I like that it's a decade long, somewhere from 8 to 12 years. It works really well to plan for that. But it took me 2.5 corrections to figure this out. It took the pandemic showing up for the light bulb to go on that we have an opportunity here. Do I really want to wait 10 more years?
Yeah.
So if you take advantage of where we are in the cycle today, I wouldn't wait that decade. I would get started today.
Hmm. That's awesome. And but is there like a Unicon life impacted? Like, is there a scalability increase? Because I know you mentioned about different funds, and I have questions for that too later. But is there also like some ultimate goals that you're kind of setting for yourself with that midterm goal?
Usually, once you have found your superpower and that's become a large part of your day, you start dreaming towards how you can give back. So now the focus is shifting. Our income comes from multifamily. It's all we do. Our income comes from fund management. It's all we do. Now we're looking at how to give back in the world.
Mhm.
So what's become really important to us is patriotism and also homelessness. We're already in the housing space. I was raised extremely patriotic. My father served. My nephew is leaving for the Air Force soon. So we wanted to find a way to tie in the things that we're passionate about
Mhm.
into a solution that can benefit the world.
Mhm.
And so we're doing some very interesting things, talking to mayors about their homelessness problem. And it's very early on in the plans, but what we have found is that usually homelessness is a symptom of a bigger problem.
Mhm.
So it's not as simple as putting a roof over your head. There's some social services side to it as well. So in 5 or 10 years, even though we have a lot of income coming in from funds, what I really see going on is philanthropy back into a housing related topic like homelessness, or helping our veterans, or getting them off the street and getting them the care they need to be able to get back on their feet. After serving in the government world, coming back and integrating into the civilian world. We want to be a part of that. That's the feel good side of the business that we see coming from the vehicles we're using.
That's awesome. That's great. And I know that you have two lovely children. And what are you doing today to kind of set them up for, financial literacy, financial success?
We involve them in everything. So there's times where we've pulled them out of school and taken them to a closing or a property tour or a sign picture. I have pictures of my kids with everything we've bought in the sign. So as they get taller and taller and taller, there's going to be this whole photo album. And, if they decide to do it, they're going to be third generation. I'm not going to push that on them. That's if they want to do that. I want them to do what they love and be successful at it. But I want them to understand what their parents sacrificed to as well, how much it takes to run a business, how much it takes to do something like what we're doing, but that we also set no ceiling on what we were doing, and that they can do anything they set their minds to. The financial literacy will come later when they're a bit older, but we are going to start showing them what we look at in the books, why we look at it. They know all my property managers' names right now. So now it's more about people than it is numbers. Later that'll build on that. They'll do people and numbers.
That's great. That's awesome. And I understand that your husband kind of work in the same industry as you do. You can kind of get into this a little bit. What does he do?
So John's background was in casualty insurance claims. And he got so good at what he did, they moved him to commercial, and then they moved him into mediation, expert witness, and something that's called the appraisal process. And so he got extremely good at finding things wrong with commercial buildings and telling somebody what it's going to take to bring it back to where it was. And so he used all of that knowledge from that industry to come alongside me and do multifamily construction, damage consulting, and expert witnessing when these claims for these big multifamily losses don't go the way we want them to. So he siloed into the building consulting, the damage consulting, and the construction side. And I deal with all of the acquisitions, business plan implementation, and rev ops.
That's awesome. And then how do you separate work from life? Being working with your spouse as well all the time.
One of the reasons that we silo is because we learned very early that we have two A-type personalities and we needed to stay in our lane, right? So it's separate on purpose. And one of the ways we balanced it with family is I went into multifamily full-time to get my time back. So my work day is when the kids are at school and when they're in bed. And I get to take any days off or on I want to. So I go to field trips. I get involved in their school. I balance it around a different schedule than a 9 to 5. So I get about 6 hours of work in a day. And because of my family and the importance we have there, it makes me better at being time efficient or delegating. If I don't have more time, who can help me with this? Right? I'm constantly asking myself, is there anybody else who could take this on so it doesn't have to sit in my inbox as an unread email till it gets done? Right. Exactly. And so it's made me better. And then summers are even harder because they're home. So then I get even more efficient at who can help me with this so that I can have my summer back with my kids. And so I think it's going to be an ongoing process. I don't think there is a balance. It's just, are you improving?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, awesome. Well, this is about to end. It's at the bottom of our show over here. Jennifer, how can people find out what you do, what your fund is about?
Awesome. Yeah, we have a website. It's www.jjcapitalinvestments.com. So I'm Jennifer Joyce, and I'm JJ Capital Investments.
It's awesome. Or JJ, it's not, I saw it was John in there too.
Our kids' names are J's too, so everybody's J.
Makes it easy. Yes, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time today. And that's a wrap for our 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence for this episode. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.